Respite from cyber tensions. Humans in a different part of the galaxy were desperately fighting cyber war. We know nothing of the date or the location of the planetary system or systems where the war raged, except that it involved a planet called Voga. The Vogan War. The Nomads had evolved somewhat since they had left the solar system. Dr. Four describes these Cybermen as
utterly ruthless, total machine creatures.
The Cybermen themselves claimed to be able to create a whole new army of cyber troops from parts which they carried with them in their ships, though this may only have been possible provided they had at their disposal suitable organic material in the shape of humanoids. Nevertheless, they made careful distinction between themselves as Cybermen and what they termed animal organisms. The animal organism was less efficient. Humans were animal organisms. The logical corollary was that humans must eventually succumb to cyber aggression. It was in this way, they believed, that Cybermen were destined to control the galaxy. The Cybermen had fought a hard war against the humans and their other adversaries. A cyber victory seemed inevitable. Then, from the jaws of defeat, human ingenuity snatched an unexpected reprieve. Gold, that most unreactive of metals, highly valued by humans throughout the galaxy and long imbued with mystical powers, gold was found to be the catalyst, turning base defeat into almost unalloyed victory. It might even be said to have had a mystical power over the Cybermen, for somehow an unexpected discovery was made. In certain forms, that of gold dust, for example, the metal devastated the cyber mechanism. The Doctor explains its effect on Cybermen thus.
It's the perfect non-corrodable metal. It plates their breathing apparatus and in effect suffocates them.
Even the cyber leader admits
gold is hostile to our function.
Voga was a planet whose heart was almost pure gold. In fact, there was more gold on Voga than the rest of the known galaxy. When gold was found to be inimical to cyber function, it was the timely collaboration between humans and the humanoid Vogans that led to the almost complete destruction of the cyber forces. The Vogans provided the gold, and the humans devised the technology with which it could be turned into an effective weapon. The most celebrated of these devices was dubbed the glitter gun, and, perhaps in similar fashion to the blunderbuss of early Earth weaponry, it sprayed out deadly particles, gold dust. Before the Cybermen were entirely vanquished by glitter gun technology, they turned their dwindling might against Voga itself. In an attempt to utterly destroy the source of their defeat by means of a massive explosion, however, the Cybermen only succeeded in vaporizing part of the planet. The remaining fragment was flung out of the planetary system at such speed that it entered a spacewalk. The last remaining cybership in the once mighty cyber-nomad fleet gave chase. The explosion, which pushed Voga into a different sector of the galaxy, had also badly mutilated it. It was hardly distinguishable from the billions of meteors circling the myriad planetary systems of the galaxy. The task of the pursuing Cybermen was formidable. Their intent, however, was relentless. The search went on for centuries. Meanwhile, another search was in progress. In their hyper-driven control ship, the remaining Cybermen of the solar system had finally departed and were now seeking a suitable planetary system where they could survive, grow mightier, and extend the limits of conquest. But their power was running out. The search could not be continued indefinitely. the colonization of Telos. At this phase of their development, survival was more important than conquest. It was for this reason that they became attracted to the planet Telos. The refrigerated cities built by the inhabitants of Telos, the Cryons, were ideal for the preservation of the Cybermen. The race was predominantly feminine by nature, as opposed to the predominantly masculine Cybermen. Nonetheless, there are hints in Document 9, in which we shall see they play a significant role, that unlike the Cybermen, the Cryons are not unaware of the delights of sexuality. Nevertheless, Document 9 reveals the Cryons as doughty opponents of the Cybermen. This gives us some clue as to the initial difficulties the cyber invaders might have had in establishing themselves on their newly adopted planet. What is certain, however, is that the Cryons were eventually subjugated, their cryogenic technology exploited, and their race all but wiped out. The Cybermen, having conquered, now made preparation for their long-term survival. Their physical appearance was unchanged since their involvement at the moon base. But this form was in itself a considerable evolution from the cyber faction of the first invasion. From the moment of adopting Telos as their own planet, they can be formally recognized as a new subspecies, Cyber-Telosian. As such, these Cybermen entered a frozen limbo of suspended animation within the underground chambers. The cryogenic cities had become cyber-sarcophagi, tombs whose inhabitants rested in a living death. Let the last word on this middle period be left to Navaza. The tombs were not merely a resting place for the Cybermen. They were also a trap of a very specific kind, for they reasoned that one day there would be visitors to the planet. If the creatures were clever enough, they would pass certain tests inherent in penetrating the tombs, and the frozen Cybermen would be reactivated. The visitors would thus have selected themselves as suitable for conversion, and as Cybermen would return to their own planet to create a new cyber race. In this way, the Cybermen of Telos could ensure their survival. But for hundreds of years, they lay in frozen sleep. The expedition party that landed on Telos at the end of the 25th century was surprisingly small scale. No more than a dozen strong, it had set off from Earth in a chartered spacecraft. It was piloted by Captain Hopper, Jim Callum, and Ted Rogers. It was led by archaeologists Professor Parry, John Viner, and Peter Hayden. It was financed by logician Eric Klieg. The only woman of the party, Kaftan, was also a logician. She had with her a bodyguard of massive strength and huge proportions called Cybermen. Awakening of the Cyber-Telosians, Document 6. Somehow, the expedition knew that Telos had become the home of the Cybermen. They also knew where to find the entrance to one of the ancient refrigerated cities which had been converted into cyber tombs. No mention was made, however, of the city architects, the Cryons, and there was to be no sign of them for the duration of the archaeological visit. The TARDIS materialized on Telos just as the great doors of the city had been located. Dr. 2 was accompanied by Jamie and a young girl companion, Victoria Waterfield. Her father had been killed by Daleks. See The Evil of the Daleks. And so, parentless, she had joined Jamie and the Doctor in their time travels. The Doctor knew it was the best way to heal her sadness. Our lives are different to everybody else's. That's the exciting thing. Nobody in the universe can do what we're doing. The expedition party took the Doctor and Victoria and Jamie for rival archaeologists and viewed them with suspicion at first. When the Doctor discovered it was the Cybermen who were the object of the party's researches, his curiosity got the better of him. He decided to assist them. The great doors of the city were electrified. One of the expedition's crewmen had been killed trying to open them. When the Doctor succeeded in showing how it could be done in safety, he was accepted into the party. The great doors opened onto a cavernous chamber. There was a large hatch set in the metal floor, and a large control panel covered with complex instrumentation. Two large archways led away from the main area. Some of the party began to explore the regions beyond. The Doctor and Klieg were more interested in opening the hatch. The control panel was constructed to human dimensions and conveniently labeled in the kind of symbolic logic that humans would understand. But it was not immediately apparent how they should be operated. As Klieg worked at solving a mathematical sequence which might activate the controls, the Doctor warned,
"Some things are better left undone, and I have a feeling that this is one of them."
Beyond one of the archways was what seemed to be a chamber for the revitalization of Cybermen. It was dominated by an upright and open form designed to envelop a Cyberman. When closed and activated, it would fire in some sort of neuro-electric potential at the occupant. Victoria, who was measuring her tiny frame against the hugeness of the form, suddenly found herself momentarily trapped inside, when in the main chamber, Klieg succeeded in activating the control. At the same time, in the area beyond the other archway, Peter Heyman fell foul of a weapons testing device and was killed. Professor Parry decided that the expedition was putting too many lives at risk and should now be abandoned. But sabotage to the spacecraft's fuel pumps meant that they would be grounded for several days. Toberman had secretly caused the damage on orders from the logicians. Klieg knew the hatchway led to the cyber tombs and did not want to be diverted from his task, now they were so close. Klieg possessed the kind of megalomania that had afflicted Tobias Vaughan. In Klieg's view, the Brotherhood of Logicians represented the greatest man-intelligence ever assembled. But logic and intelligence were not enough. In order to carry out the kind of changes on Earth that were clearly of logical benefit to mankind, it was necessary to wield real power. Power to force conformity from those who did not share the logician's vision. It seemed the Cybermen had this power. The logicians had financed the expedition precisely in order to find and use it. They were exultant when the hatchway eventually swung open, responding to a logical sequence. Kaftan declared,
"Everything yields to logic. Our basic assumption, Doctor."
Really?
The party descended through the hatch to explore the warren of interconnected metal caverns in the sub-zero temperatures below. Only Victoria and Kaftan remained on ground level. Choosing one particular tunnel at random, the underground explorers came to a massive vault whose walls sparkled silver with highly reflective material. Towering in front of them was the impressive object of their expedition, the tombs of the Cybermen. The whole party stared in awe at cells which rose above them, level upon level. In each cell, behind a frosted membrane, lurked the figure of a Cyberman in frozen stillness. Klieg spoke of it in hushed tones, scarcely concealing his malign intentions.
Like a gigantic honeycomb, like bees, waiting for the signal to arise from their winter sleep.
On the surface, By previous arrangement with Klieg, Kaftan resealed the hatch. She had already drugged Victoria's drink to prevent her from interfering. It seemed to the underground party that they were trapped and might freeze to death. Under the pretense of using the tomb controls to reopen the hatch, Klieg deliberately activated the tombs themselves. As the chamber grew warmer, there were ominous signs of movement from within each cell. Then, through every membrane, a Cyberman burst forth. They were identical in almost every detail to those Cybermen who were last seen on the moon. Silent, slow, but with never faltering intent, the silver giants approached the fear-rooted humans. Among them, the last to be revived and emerging from a special tomb, was a giant of even mightier proportions. Cyberman in form, it had no chest pack and no antenna. Its cranium was enlarged into a bulbous dome which seemed to flicker from within as though its very thoughts were visible. Klieg began to explain that it was he who had brought them back to life. Ignoring the logician, the controller, for so the doctor termed this hugest of the creatures, declared,
"You belong to us. You shall be like us."
As in the past, once face to face with the Cybermen, the doctor was recognized immediately.
My stream computer has full details of you.
Ah, yes, the lunar surface.
The doctor realized. The cyber controller announced that these humans, who had proved themselves of superior intelligence, would become the first of a new race of Cybermen, a force that would return to Earth and control it. The first to be altered would be Klieg. As a logician, he would make the natural leader of the new race. Fear would be eliminated from his brain. But Victoria had woken and raised the alarm. Captain Hopper and Jim Callum came to the rescue with smoke grenades. In the confusion, all except Toberman escaped to the surface, and the massive hatch was lowered at once to keep the Cybermen at bay. Klieg and Kaftan were locked into the weapons testing chamber. The others spent an uncomfortable night, taking it in turns to watch for signs of cyber activity. Reactivating their dormant cybermats, the Cybermen directed them to attack the sleeping humans. The doctor, knowing that cybermats
They're a form of metallic life.
detected humans by picking up their brainwave frequencies, jammed their sensors with electrical interference. He put it this way.
The power cable generated an electrical field and confused their tiny metal minds. You might almost say they've had a complete metal breakdown.
In the testing chamber, Kaftan and Klieg had found parts of a cyber weapon, a small X-ray laser, which they had reassembled. They intended to force the Cybermen to divulge a few of their secrets. Holding the rest of the party at a laser point, they called for the cyber controller. The hypercranial Cyberman soon appeared, accompanied by Toberman. Kaftan's servant had been partially converted. His limbs were now more powerful than before. They had been replaced by metal, and his mind was under cyber control. To conserve energy supplies, the controller had sent most of the Cybermen back into their tombs. Clearly, the controller itself was running seriously low in energy. Its voice was slowing. Klieg agreed to revitalize the controller in return for cyber power devices to aid the logicians build a better world. Not surprisingly, once the controller had been recharged, the agreement was ignored.
Cybermen do not promise. Such ideas have no value.
Now fully powered and seemingly invincible, even bullets had no effect. The controller ordered the reactivation of all the tombs. There was a struggle in which Kaftan was killed. Toberman's former loyalty to her penetrated his altered brain, and encouraged by the Doctor, his cyber-assisted strength was turned against the controller. In the ensuing clash of titans, the controller was defeated. Klieg, in the face of all that had happened, was still determined to take over the Cybermen's power for himself. Led on by the Doctor, he finally admitted his real ambition to be master of the world.
Well, now I know you're mad. I just wanted to make sure,
said the Doctor. At that moment, there appeared a Cyberman for whom any human was enemy. Klieg was killed. The others escaped, and the Doctor refroze the tombs. He had just reset the electrification trap on the great doors when the controller revived. Toberman, in a huge effort of will, closed the doors on the cyber controller. The resulting electrical explosion destroyed them both, or so it appeared. Only the Professor, Captain Hopper, and his pilot remained of the original party. The Cybermen, though their plan had failed, had nevertheless exacted a terrible toll.
Now that really is the end of the Cybermen, isn't it?
Asked Jamie hopefully.
I never like to make predictions,
replied the Doctor. As the three of them made their way back to the TARDIS, they did not notice that something still moved over the dusty wastes of Telos. It was a Cyberman. Within the large fragment of Voga which had survived the massive cyber explosion, Vogans still survived. Emerging from space warp, they had found themselves drifting on the fringes of a planetary system which was dominated by a yellow star of medium size. 500 million miles out from this sun was a gigantic planet that might be described as a failed star, a brown dwarf, but massive enough to radiate heat into the mini-system of its own satellites. The sun was Sol. The planet was Jupiter. By curious coincidence, the Vogans had turned up in the very solar system that had spawned the Cybermen. The Pursuit of Voga, Document 7. Terrified of discovery, they had remained underground in the closeness of the survival chamber which had preserved them from the effects of the cyber attack. For centuries, they cowered inside their shattered planet. They were a humanoid race, straying little from human appearance. Their large-boned faces differed the most. A high-vaulting forehead denoted ancient intelligence. From this dome's imposing height, long tresses of hair fell back, pure white. Perhaps only the deep lines to either side of the mouth suggested the generations of dark skulking that had eaten into this proud, light-loving people. Denying themselves their once lucrative trade in gold with other civilizations, avoiding, indeed, any outside contact at all, the Vogans toiled hard to survive in their subterranean world. It was the function of an elite force, the Guardians, to ensure that the secrecy of their continued survival was maintained. Over the centuries, Voga drifted in from the deeper reaches of cometary cloud and was itself caught in Jupiter's gravitational field. Earth had now advanced to the point where the solar system was under constant surveillance. Great circle freighters would make journeys beyond the solar system, which could last for decades. Sometimes their charts of the solar system would be outdated on their return. For this reason, beacons were set up whenever a new object was found in the solar system. When Voga was discovered, it was initially named Neo-Phoebus, literally New Sun. The Nerva beacon, a space wheel similar to that in Document 4, was put on a 30-year assignment to alert returning freighters to its presence. Professor Kelman was the exographer, or planetary surveyor, aboard the Nerva beacon. He was a specialist in Jupiter and its satellites. He landed on Neo-Phoebus to set up a transmat station, a method of instant travel, made his examinations of the new asteroid, and returned to the beacon with the unexceptional information that it was a small, lifeless rock which must have drifted towards Jupiter from the void between star systems. He suggested renaming it Voga. Kelman had deliberately misinformed his colleagues. The Vogan Guardians had immediately detected Kelman and brought him before their leader, Vorus. Though it contravened Vogan laws, Vorus had devised a bold plan to eliminate the Cybermen, who were even now searching the galaxy for Voga. In return for limitless gold, Kelman agreed to contact the Cybermen and inform them of the whereabouts of their quarry. Vorus had secretly constructed the missile Sky Striker to destroy the cybership when it came within range. The Cybermen were monitoring a wide range of radio frequencies in their search for Voga. They soon detected Kelman's transmissions. He persuaded them that control of the Nerva beacon was the key to the destruction of Voga. Understanding his reason for helping them, he wanted power, they agreed that he should rule the solar system when they had conquered it. Using cyber technology, Kelman unleashed in the beacon what appeared to be an unknown form of space plague. It caused a luminous redness under the skin, along the line of the nerves, and was similar to the neurotropic virus induced by the Cybermen in the Moonbase crew, document 5. But it was cybermats, not sugar, that carried the infection, and it swiftly led not to coma, but to death. It decimated the beacon's crew of 50. Only 4 of them remained alive, of which Kelman was of course one. Nerva beacon was quarantined, and the servicing of passing ships transferred to a nearby beacon named Ganymede, after the largest of Jupiter's satellites. We are not told precisely during what period these events took place. For the purpose of this chronology, I place it at the end of the 25th century. We are told that it was on day 3 of the 47th week of the unknown year that Dr. 4 materialized in a sealed-off section of Nerva. 2 companions, Harry Sullivan and Sarah Jane Smith, materialized with him. It was fortuitous that the Doctor should have arrived at this precise moment, for he knew of Voga. He explained to the commander of the beacon that the planet of gold had caused the defeat of Cybermen at the end of the war against allied human and Vogan forces. For the commander, mention of the Cybermen revived only dim memories. Like the archaeologists of Telos, he thought they had died out centuries ago, after the destruction of Mondas. But an attack on Sarah Jane by a Cybermat soon confirmed that Cybermen were very much alive, and were interested in the beacon. They obviously had a human agent on board, and Kelman seemed the prime suspect. Before he was caught, he managed to get a signal to the cybership. Already within the solar system, it now moved towards the beacon, and quickly overcame its much-reduced crew. Unlike the previous 3 encounters of our chronology, the Cybermen did not recognize the Doctor. Cyberman, document 7, late Cybernomad. Evolved from early Cyberfaction, First Invasion, these Cybermen retain striated head blocks and 5-fingered hands, but are more rugged. The slight humps on their backs might, like the Earth camel, store extra supplies of power, or, if possessing hydraulic muscles, as the Doctor suggests, a fluid reservoir. Handheld weapons had been relinquished, but the area to the front of the cranium bulge is the sight of a sophisticated weapon. Operated from the chest back, it is capable of stunning or killing. They have an exoskeleton of thick, striated piping, rather than the more delicate framework of the first invasion, a direction in which late cyberfaction also appeared to be developing. Long centuries of cyber development in the cyber nomad had produced two phenomena of interest. The first was that, like the Cybermen in the Telosian tombs, they were invulnerable to the humans' handheld weapons. The second strangely contradicted what we have come to expect of the Cybermen. There was evidence of emotion. The Vogons spoke of the vengeance of the Cybermen. The Doctor said that Voga was hated and feared by them. It could not actually be emotion which the Cybermen seemed to display. Cyber development is solidly based in logic. Emotion is entirely alien to them. Document 1 shows it to be as hostile to their function as radiation, gravity, or gold. Emotion is an instinctive response, as opposed to a rational one. In an emotional response, one is not precisely aware of the reasons for one's behavior. But a rational response, by its very definition, implies that the reasons for it have been thought out beforehand. It is significant that the words emotion and motivate have the same root, meaning to move. Over centuries of cybernetic development, the aims which motivated the Cybermen, the very rational goals of survival and conquest, had become, through constant use and the need for swift decision-making, an almost instinctive response in itself. Reasoned behavior proceeds from one step to the next in logical progression. If the process is cybernetically controlled, which in the Cybermen it clearly is, they are guiding principles or directives which steer the decision-making towards the target. The target for the Cybermen is survival. It can be described as their intent or directive. Survival motivates them. Their behavior depends on what fits in best with their ultimate intent, survival. When their intentions are threatened or thwarted, Cybermen always react logically. It is evident, however, that at the stage of development we see here, there is a certain, shall we say, intensity of reaction. It is that intensity which can appear comparable with emotion. But certainly, the voices of the Cybermen were less monotonous and electronic, particularly the voice of the Cyber leader, who was denoted by black head blocks and antennae. In fact, and it now seems natural to apply the personal pronoun, his mode of speech was comparable to that of a highly motivated human. And it is significant that, for the first time, we hear a Cyberman use value judgments such as
Good.
or
Excellent.
a cyber epithet which is to resound through the rest of the history. What moved the Cybermen to seemingly vengeful action was the completion of a task they had started centuries ago in a different star system. They needed to destroy Voga utterly, to vaporize the planet so that its gold would no longer be a source of danger to them. It would be blown into subatomic fragments by what the Cybermen claimed to be
The most compact and powerful explosive devices ever invented.
These cyber bombs had been banned by an Armageddon convention. Since
Cybermen do not subscribe to any theory of morality in war.
3 bombs were to be placed in a central fissure of the planet. The Doctor, the Commander, and another crewman were to deliver them personally. Any attempt at removal of the harness which attached the bombs would result in the detonation of a secondary explosion. 2 Cybermen accompanied them as they transmatted to Voga. The Cybermen were detected soon after materializing, but the Vogons' weapons were totally ineffective against their old enemy. In an act of self-sacrifice, The crewman threw himself at the Cybermen, unbuckling his harness. The resulting explosion engulfed all three of them. The doctor salvaged one of the mangled cyber chest packs and deactivated the cyber bombs. Denied the success of their original plan to ensure the destruction of Voga, the Cybermen swiftly devised another. Many more cyber bombs were brought aboard the beacon, which was to be aimed at Voga, where the crust of the planet was weakest. Cyber calculations indicated that it would cause the
biggest explosion ever witnessed in this solar system. It will be a magnificent spectacle.
The Doctor and Sarah were by this time on board the beacon. The Cybermen had left them bound together in the control room before departing to their cybership to observe the phenomenon which was about to occur. They estimated that the fireball of the explosion would extend to 1.5 million miles. The beacon had been put into hyperdrive, and as the two time travelers watched the planet of gold grow larger on the scanner in front of them, they knew they were heading for the biggest bang in history. This was regardless of whether they had struck Voga, for Vorus's Sky Striker missile had been launched and was heading towards the beacon. The commander and Harry, under the Doctor's guidance, diverted Sky Striker's course and aimed it at the cybership. Before the Cybermen had time to take evasive action, the missile had struck. The huge craft was obliterated. Harry Sullivan sighed with relief.
That's the end of your Cybermen,
he said. Tyrum, the chief counselor of Voga, agreed.
Never again will they be a threat to Voga.
But Sarah Jane and the Doctor were not yet safe. The beacon's course had been locked on by the Cybermen, and it was still heading at hyper-driven speed towards Voga. Utilizing a handy rope trick he had picked up from Houdini, a 19th century Earth escapologist, the Doctor freed himself just in time to set up a manual override to stop the beacon from crashing into the planet. The rocky surface spun beneath them as the space wheel zipped round Voga at incredible speed. At last it broke away from the planet's dizzying grip and settled into a safer and more stable orbit. Preserved from alien destruction by the non-human Doctor, the beacon would in future millennia become an ark of refuge to preserve the lives of millions of Earth people. The Sky Striker missile had destroyed the last of the Cyber-Nomad subspecies. Blind pursuance of the deep-rooted cybernetic instincts had, as human emotion sometimes can, consumed the pursuer. It is often said, we kill the thing we love. These Cybermen, who sought nothing above their own survival, brought about their own destruction through too zealous a seeking of that end. Revenge had claimed the Avenger as its victim. But if this history teaches us nothing else, it tells us one thing quite clearly. Complacency over Cybermen is misplaced. One line of the cyber race may have ended, but other subspecies continued to survive and conquer. We need only think of the cyber leader's boast to know that, like an infectious disease, the Cybermen would be hard to eradicate.
We have enough parts in our ship to build an entirely new cyber army. And this time, Doctor, it will be invincible.
The cyber leader's ship and its potential for creating new Cybermen was no longer a source of danger. But the threat could not be discounted because of that. How many other battalions of Nomads roamed the galaxy? More to the point, how many had the capability of reproducing themselves? Proliferating Cybermen. By the middle of the third millennium, the people of Earth had not only firmly established themselves within their own solar system, they had also gained a foothold on planets in other star systems. Farazia thinks that, in a similar process, Cyber-Nomad had proliferated. She finds evidence in our final 3 documents to suppose that the influences of 2 subspecies had come together. Out of the union had been forged a new, indomitable Cyberman, a subspecies advanced to a breathtaking degree of sophistication, a leap of evolution. She dubbed them the ultimate Cybermen. I should like to classify them as cyber-neomorph, new-fashioned Cybermen. Farazia's hypothesis, accounting for how the neomorph Cybermen may have been created, runs thus. We know little of almost 5 centuries of cyber-nomad activity. From the first part of this period, we know nothing. That is, from the time they leave the solar system in the late 20th century until they turn up in advanced form in another star system in the Vogan War. We place the episode of the Pursuit of Voga, document 7, in the late 25th century. The Vogans had lived underground for centuries. We may assume, therefore, that the Vogan War had been fought during the 22nd century. That would allow up to 200 years, from round about 1990 to round about 2190, for Cyber-Nomad to establish themselves and proliferate. Time enough, Farazia suggests, to spawn several divergent groups. One group became involved in the Vogan War and the subsequent hounding of Voga. Another might well have gone on to the conquest of other planets in the galaxy. Here we come to the crux of her speculation. Suppose that after the tombs had been refrozen by the Doctor, this successful group of Cybermen came somehow into contact with Telos. We know from document 9 that the cyber controller was not destroyed, merely damaged. Perhaps he himself had activated a radio signal designed to attract the attention of any cyber group which may have successfully proliferated during the 5 centuries of cyber-Telosian sleep. As commonly happens, once a connection is made, it seems so clear. But it needed Farazia's insight to help us see the obvious. The forging of a new race. The new Cybermen had been formed from 2 differing cyber subspecies. One was Cyber-Nomad, of a type probably less advanced than the Cybermen involved in the Vogan War. The other was Cyber-Telosian, with its cyber controller as the catalyst. Farazia postulates that one of the proliferated and successful groups of nomads came to Telos. They revived and reconstructed the cyber controller and developed a new form of exoshell that incorporated the most efficient aspects of Nomad and Telosian design. It was based on the less encumbered technology of the cyber controller. Cyberman, documents 890, Cyber-Neomorph. Instead of the cyber chest pack, which the cyber-Telosian controller did not need, an elegant armored unit protects the torso. Its sleek lines contain all that is necessary to independent functioning. Instead of a mass of flimsy pipes, one sturdy tube leads from the torso unit, feeding and controlling the rest of the cyber body. Instead of a framework of rods or tubes, a sophisticated exoshell ensures optimum support and control. The former exoskeletons seem clumsy by comparison. The face has become more fearsome, and cranial capacity is larger. Refined Nomad head blocks support Telosian-type antenna. Finally, new weapons, which emit lethal, blasting rays, are carried in hands that are powerfully 5-fingered. Thus, Cybermen created the neomorph in their own perfected image. The tombs were reactivated, and the Telosian Cybermen within, as well as their nomadic liberators, were converted to the new form. The energy sources of Telos were opened up for cyber exploitation. Telos became what Mondas failed to be, the center of a flourishing cyber empire. Colonial expansion was followed by periods of consolidation. As conquests were made and humanoid races converted, vast armies were stored in the refrigerated cities of Telos. They would soon be powerful enough to unleash an attack of unprecedented effectiveness on Earth.